Okay, I'm gonna try and get this off as quickly as possible before I run out of space on my computer. So we are finishing up talking about Reflections on the Philosophy of Hitlerism by Emmanuel Levinas, and we've come to the very end where he's answering the key question: how is universality compatible with racism? And his answer is that it requires a basic modification of the very idea of universality. Universality must give way to the idea of expansion. Right? So Levinas sees the idea of the universal no longer as a tool to create a community of equals, right? Universality in the Platonic sense or in the ideal Kantian sense involves the propagation of a universal idea, something that is universally valid for all people and would create, as Levinas says, a community of masters. It's a process of equalization. To convert or persuade is to create peers. The universality of an order in Western society always reflects this universality of truth, but force is characterized by another type of propagation. So when universality stops becoming about propagation of ideas and gives way, as he says, to a form of force, right? Universality becomes that which is capable of putting everything under it, that which can force everything to conform to it. So universalism, the idea of ethical universalism, becomes a form of universal political coercion, in a sense, right? And this ties into the philosophy of Hitlerism, right? Because the idea is that we want to, that the Nazis wanted to eradicate all difference, right? To exterminate the Jews is to find, freedom through the identity that's found in biology, heredity, so on. There is no universalism that is transcultural or transhistorical. There is only that which has the capacity, the power, the force to become universal. Right? And things become universal through expansion by force, right? So that the extermination of those outside your blood lines, kinship, family ties, tribe, your ethnicity and race is part of this forced expansion and universalization, right? Levinas says, to understand universalism as expansion is at the heart of the project of Western philosophy in general. The universalism in the modern age becomes explicitly about expansion, but this drive and desire for universality is at the heart of Western philosophy to begin with. And this drive for universality is what creates the possibility for Nazism, for racism, when universality is modified to mean that which is capable of being universalized, that which is capable of universal expansion, what is capable, in short, of world domination. So, right, this is the way the Nazi ideology gets sort of linked up with the rest of Western philosophy. And this connects back to Levinas's larger idea about the idea of otherness and the other and respect for the other person. What we need to do in philosophy, Levinas thinks, is not just challenge the validity of universal ideas, but, and he's sort of Nietzschean in this, but to give up on any project of totalization at all, right? Any project that seeks a philosophical, comprehensive philosophical system, a system that grasps the totality of being. He thinks this idea is dangerous and is inevitably or has a likelihood of turning into this kind of expansion that rather than trying to explain everything that is in one framework, will seek to force everything that is to fit into a framework, right? And this is where you get the disrespect for the other, the rejection of the other, the coercion of the other to fit into a general, quote-unquote, universal schema. So the idea of universalism becomes, for Levinas, a kind of violence, right, that seeks to reduce the other to myself, right? To say anything other than myself needs to be controlled, needs to be either eradicated or converted. And so for Levinas, my relation to the other person is an ethical relation, and one that needs to precede and which supersedes any metaphysics which aims at totality. I have to consider my relation to the other as being primary, because that relationship is where I get my authentic sense of self in the first place, and it is by attending to my ethical relation to the other in the first place that I can ensure myself against the kind of desire for totality and the racism and nationalism and imperialism that are attendant to that. So Levinas concludes his essay saying, racism is not just opposed to such and such a particular point in Christian and liberal culture. It is not a particular dogma concerning democracy, parliamentary government, dictatorial regime, or religious politics that is in question. So racism is not something that is opposed to the idea of a multicultural democracy or extending the vote to black people or immigrants or any particular point in liberal ideology. And here he makes his most radical claim, I think. He says, racism is not just opposed to a particular point. It is the very humanity of man. Now, what he means by this is not that we are by nature racist at all. What he means is that in the attempt to uncover a universal humanity, the project of finding universalism, the project of finding that humanity which is common to all, is going to give way to or implies a certain kind of racism. Right? So when he is speaking here of the humanity of man, he's thinking about, in particular, the Declaration of the Rights of Man, which is an 18th century declaration in France, part of the French Revolution. He's thinking about the idea from modernity of universal humanity and humanism. And the idea is not to either claim that human beings are inherently racist, nor to claim, nor to sort of degrade the idea of humanity or humanism per se, but to point out that the way that we have historically in philosophy gone about thinking about humanity and what it means to be human, namely to seek the essence of being human, an essence which would be universal, is an impossible project that finds an easy end in transforming universalism into expansion, and to say, this is the essence of being human. Anyone who doesn't conform to this essence must not be human, and therefore must be eradicated or be forced to conform to this essence. Right? So the essential point here is that the attempt to essentialize humanity, to essentialize what it means to be human, to search for the essence of human being, and to claim that that essence is going to be universal, that already always has racist possibilities inherent to it. And so by emphasizing the other and otherness, by recognizing my authentic self as being constituted through a relation to another person, and understanding that other as fundamentally other from me, Levinas wants to introduce into philosophy a different vision of ethics, which would be an ethics of interruption, of disruption, an ethics that values difference, that values alterity, and which will see essentialization, normativity, and universality as being dangerous terms for any ethics. So a challenge to the entire tradition of Western ethics, Western philosophy, and in particular, as we saw, a challenge to the Kantian ideas of rationality and autonomy. All right, so this has been a longer lecture on Levinas than intended, and hopefully this video is short enough to save to my computer. And next week next video, we'll be looking at Angela Davis's essay, Racism, Birth Control, and Reproductive Rights. There's a link on the syllabus. I'll get that video to you as soon as possible. And until then, hasta la vista.